Hello, and welcome back to Bumblebee, everyone. Today's video is in the land of beans for breakfast and double-decker buses. It's the top 10 reasons living in English Parliament was horrible. Starting with the obvious, weird niche expectations. If the Brit government and royalty love doing anything, it's holding on to the past. When it comes to their idea of traditions and what's important, well, nothing was left behind. Even the traditions that should have been left behind. One hilarious example is when the mace, the symbol of Parliament being fully constituted, is brought into the House of Commons. It's by a man who has an exaggerated mincing walk like he's 90s Ozzy Osbourne trying to hold in diarrhea. And he's all dressed in medieval style, skin-tight, ancient clothing. The walk has to be seen to be believed because you can't film it, but also because it's apparently painfully ridiculous. And they know it because there are literally stern instructions that laughing is not permitted, whether you're a tourist or a chamber member. You can giggle and hide your face if you need to, I guess. Another strange tradition is the door of the House of Commons, where a worn-out chunk of wood officially known as the Black Rod is sent to summon the Commons. They literally slam the door in the face of the doorman, and it has to be his face, no joke, and it won't open again until he's knocked with the Black Rod with his staff of office. This knocking has gone on since the last monarch to enter the House of Commons was King Charles I in 1642. Okay, now from here on out I'm gonna say it's not gonna be the most positive or upbeat video. So we're going to financial corruption next. While less egregious than attempted killings or affairs with gangsters or feigned deaths that you're gonna be hearing about through the video, these everyday revelations of financial dishonesty proved ultimately more detrimental to the public confidence in ministers in British politics more generally. In addition to their official salaries, ministers are entitled to reimbursement for expenses associated with their parliamentary careers, including the cost of maintaining 2 homes, one in London and one in their constituency. These parliamentary perks had obviously been kept from taxpayers' prying eyes, and these perks were funded by the taxpayer. In 2009, this came to an end when it became known that many British members of parliament had been exploiting their parliamentary expenses and allowances. Offences included MPs falsely designating a second home in order to claim more expense, submitting extra expenses for renovations or refurbishing their houses, and evading or avoiding tax. One Conservative MP was discovered to have claimed nearly £2,000 for a new garden duck house. The fallout of the expense scandal was marked by the resignation of certain MPs and the imprisonment of others, a drop in electoral trust in politicians, as well as a reform of parliamentary expense system. Naturally, where there's one crime, there's more, which is why living in parliament is dangerous grounds. We work closely with police to ensure members of staff are safe and able to perform their duties. A parliament spokesperson told The Sun magazine, "The safety and security of members, their staff, and parliamentary community are of absolute priority." This statement was released following a publication of crime stats on parliament property. In horrible irony, using geocoded crime data, 26 charged instances, 25 of those offenses were against the security officers working on parliament grounds. You know, the people she's saying that are the safety and security for members. Turns out grievous bodily harm, trafficking of controlled substances, theft, and more have been recorded either on, outside of, or opposite or near parliamentary buildings, culminating in a shocking 202 total crimes between April 1st of 2020 and March 21st of 2021, which, may I remind you, was the pandemic, meaning many of the approximately 3,000 pass holders who work in the parliamentary estates would have been working from home. This collection of 202 crimes occurred during a time duration where the least amount of people present on parliament property. Imagine the crime stats when people are there. So obviously, living on dangerous grounds, doing a job where you don't always make friends, there is potential for sudden death. In 2010, Labour lawmaker Stephen Timm survived a in his constituency office. He was one of the lucky ones. On June 16th of 2016, MP Joe Cox is suddenly and violently killed. The perpetrator was Thomas Alexander Mayer, a 53-year-old unemployed gardener who was a member of a neo-fascist National Front and the National Vanguard groups, aka white supremacy groups. Apparently, he saw her as a traitor to white people for supporting immigration. Friday, October 15th of 2021, British MP David Amess is killed via a stab wound received during a meeting with constituents at a church in East England. The Metro Police declared his death an act of terror, and Amess was best known for his ceaseless campaign to have the south end declared a city, something Boris Johnson announced a week later that would finally be done in order to honor Amess. But most famously was the death on May 11th, 1812 inside Westminster Hall. Spencer Perceval enjoys the unfortunate distinction of being the only British Prime Minister to die at the hands of an assassin. As he entered the House of Commons that fateful day, a man who had been sitting quietly by the fireplace, stood up, walked towards the Prime Minister, took his hand out of his overcoat pocket, and fired at Percival, hitting him in the chest and killing him instantly. Now, why would so many people want to kill you? Yes, there's corruption, and theft, and greed. But what really cheeses people the most are the dumb decision makers. There's been some legendary level bad decisions in English government over the last decade or so. Terrible elected officials, hypocrisy, bias, you name it. Had the Brexit referendum not bagged first place, the abolish of the Judicial Committee of the House of Lords and its replacement by a UK Supreme Court would 1000% be regarded as the worst political misjudgment by the modern British Prime Minister. Created by Tony Blair and Charles Falconer in 2009, it shredded centuries of legal and constitutional history with this curial reform. The consequences were evident in the court's recent ruling, in which it found that Boris Johnson's decision to suspend Parliament was unlawful because he didn't provide adequate reasons for prorogation. This was a ruling without precedent on a matter that the old House of Lords would have regarded beyond the scope of the court of law. It won't be long before the UK court is beset by the same problems and partisanship that ailed the Supreme Court in the US. One of the more deeply disappointing and shocking decision makers in British politics has been that of Priti Patel, Britain's Home Secretary, telling the Conservative Party conference that she will end free movement of people once and for all. Patel's parents were some of the few who managed to leave Uganda before Idi Amin's reform expelled thousands. Most of these expelled individuals immigrated to England. The laws Patel is trying to put in place now, her own kith and kin would have not been able to settle in the UK all those years ago, and it denies future immigrants and refugees the same rights her family had had. Oh, also Brexit. Yeah, I'd say Brexit falls under dumb decisions, but I really don't have to explain that one to you, so let's move on. Forget London Bridge, y'all, Parliament is falling down. The state of this UNESCO World Heritage Site is so dire that Parliamentary Assessment in 2016 described it as a tale of decay, despair, and dilapidation. Below its iconic towers and common chamber lie poor ventilation, outdated plumbing, and a whole lot of filth. It is a fire risk. It is unsanitary. Asbestos is packed all the way through the building. Many of the pipes and cables that carry heat, water, electricity, and gas were installed just after the war and should have been replaced in the 1970s. Some of them are still from the 19th century. The older the steam pipes become, the more likely they are to crack or leak, which can generate huge explosive energy that can be literally fatal. It also disturbs asbestos more and sends it flying in the ventilation system to be inhaled by more palace workers. Beyond its state of disrepair, the building is just all too obviously a remnant of a pre-democratic age. It's not meant for welcoming its populace in, but to impress and intimidate them with a fortress-like grandeur. With its sculptures of male politicians, heavy, eclectic furnishings, and its gentleman's club atmosphere, it provides the perfect stage for Britain's every aggressive, very masculine, very power-hoarding democracy, as political scientist Matthew Flinders put it. I'll throw something in that's lighthearted just to kind of shake things up, but living with creepy ghosts would probably suck. There are actually quite a few reported ghosts in Parliament and Westminster. In the Norman Shaw building, there was the Black Museum, which had hosted weapons, clothing, and even preserved body parts taken from both killed victims and people who were put to death as perpetrators. During the construction of the building, the body of a headless woman was found, and now staff at the museum regularly reported seeing apparitions of a cloaked but otherwise naked woman roaming the halls and the corridors. Admiralty House is said to be haunted by the ghost of Martha Ray, an 18th century woman who was shot outside of a theater in Covent Gardens by her jealous, penniless lover. What is remarkable about this ghost is the number of very credible witnesses, Winston Churchill and Harold Macmillan being two of them. Famously, on New Year's Eve of 2014, a modernly dressed spirit was caught on camera standing on the Westminster Bridge, staring over at Parliament. The photographer was alone at the time and the photo was tested for tampering, but looks like she's telling the truth. Guess not all ghosts are Victorian ladies or horned demons. Sometimes they're a dude in Converse. In order to talk about the next 2 points, we got to have a chat about the Parliament's known anti-Semitism, homophobia, and racism. Transparent anti-Semitism in the Labour Party not only increased since Jeremy Corbyn became leader in 2015, but like Trump, it gave many extremists a sense of safety in their prejudice and thus openness. And no, this isn't some we think he's an anti-Semite conspiracy. The Labour Party is literally under investigation for anti-Semitism by the Equality and Human Rights Commission. Only one other party has been investigated by the EHRC for racism, and that is the white supremacist British National Party. A University of Carolina study in 2015 found there were more openly gay MPs in Britain than anywhere else in the world. Unfortunately, it also has the highest rate of male-on-male harassment claims out of all parliaments. So bad bad that it's calling for reform. The plan would see both MPs and members of House of Lords who are accused of criminal SA offense face formal risk assessments to consider if they pose a threat to other people. They could just fire them, but that would mean taking SA towards men seriously, and it seems like people won't do that. An unfortunate 2020 study also tells us that most people of color that are British MPs have experienced racism while working in Parliament, including from fellow lawmakers. The study got 37 anonymous responses, and of those, 62% said they faced racism or racial profiling while on parliamentary estates, with 51% saying they'd experienced racism or racial profiling from other MPs. And what a lovely segue into how these are not the men you want to marry. Royal scandal rundown. Let's get her started. Chancellor Norman Lamont was revealed to have an intercourse therapist living in his taxpayer-funded rented-out London flat. David Mellor resigned as a minister after newspapers aired out his extramarital affair with actress Antonia Di Sancha. Transport Minister Stephen Norris was reportedly having simultaneous affairs with 3 women who did not know about each other. Oh, and Conservative MP Stephen Milligan was tragically found dead on his kitchen table as a result of trying to get his jollies off with some self-strangulation. When King George III took the throne in 1820, he had an estranged wife, who was also exiled, named Caroline. The two had their own affairs, their own separate lives, whatever. But once he's king, she's queen, so he wants a divorce. Instead of divorcing her through the House of Commons, where both their affairs come out, he used his position to put just her on trial for adultery before the House of Lords, where it was mostly her behavior under the microscope. Public opinion was favoring Caroline, however, because his own affairs were just so blatant, like, come on. Jeremy Thorpe, a former member of Parliament and leader of Liberal Party, was a closeted gay man hiding his identity. That is until Norman Scott, a man he had had an affair with in the early 1960s, threatened to make their relationship public. So Thorpe's idea is to try and get this dude assassinated. The assassin kills the guy's dog on accident instead, and then Thorpe is forced to resign in shame. Robert Boothby was a Conservative Party member and a reoccurring BBC commentator. During his more than 30 years on Parliament, he had an affair with his Conservative colleague and later Prime Minister Harold Macmillan's wife. He also had a gay affair with notorious East End gangster Ronnie Kray, and if you know about the Krays, you know that's a hell of a scandal. And now, to truly culminate how impossible it'd be to live here is probably the fact everyone was friends with the enemy. Well, honestly, more like banging the enemy. This is some truly abhorrent crap. Let's start. The connection begins with Charles Edward, the Duke of Saxe-Coburg and Gotha, the grandson of Queen Victoria. When the World War I broke out, he decided to support the German Empire and served in the German army. He was naturally disowned, stripped of all his British titles, but that's fine. He became president of the German Red Cross in 1933 and was extremely involved with the dictator government during World War II. John Profumo, in 1961, began an affair with Christine Keeler. Keeler was also banging a German spy. 2 years later, House of Commons asked Profumo about his relationship with Keeler, who was an obvious security risk. She banged spies. He denied it like crazy until Christine forced his hand in court, and he had to admit, then resign. Somehow worse is after he died, declassified 2017 documents revealed he had also been having an affair with a Yahtzee spy. In 1937, King Edward III, who abdicated to marry the twice-divorced Wallis Simpson, became Duke of Windsor. For their honeymoon, they went to go meet Schmittler and the other high-ranked German leaders as they were huge fans. The Duke of Windsor reportedly gave the push-broom mustache dictator a salute on 2 occasions, and Wallis was in constant contact with Ribbentrop after the war started, even keeping a signed picture of him in her dressing room. AKA, they were funneling information to the Germans, so Churchill's solution: get the Duke of Windsor out of Europe. He was appointed governor over the Bahamas, where he lived until 1945. And of course, last but never the least is how Prince Philip had 4 sisters, and 3 out of 4 married Yahtzees. Sorry, I just need to say to anyone in denial right now, this is called a pattern, okay? Big old pattern of behaviors. Anyway, eldest sister Princess Margaret married a prince who joined the Yahtzee party and served in World War II. Princess Cicely married a German aristocrat, and they both joined the Yahtzee party, only to die in a plane crash a month later. And then there's the youngest sister, Princess Sophie, who married Prince Christoph of Hesse, a senior high-ranking guard in, you guessed it, Yahtzee party, and director of the 3rd Ministries of Air Forces. Shout out to the one sister, Princess Theodora, who married a German, and they just sort of didn't do that, you know? Thank you so much for tuning in once more, and be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more from us. Until next time, remember to read and watch the news.